Hey guys, I'm coming on here in a way for a relatively self-serving post. And this is because, if you've read my Meat Fighters profile or you found me on Recon or you've seen different videos that I've done discussing crushing people and squeezing and that type of thing, then you know that that's a pretty important fetish for me. And I've talked about it a little bit as far as like technique goes, but I wanted to go ahead and give you my perspective on creating a scene around that. And there is a video I did, maybe I'll put the link in the description below, for using BDSM in wrestling, and a lot of it was like a lot of caveats of what not to do and all that, but not really, I don't think I really went into what to do. So part of this is inspired by a Watch Fighters video that I just watched with an Australian guy that was crushing the hell out of somebody, and he was very good at taunting him. He was very good at the pacing of things in ways that I don't often see with tops that I've played with over the years. So this is going to be kind of from a switch perspective because I both top and bottom for squeeze scenes and whatnot. Right now, not so much, and you're going to see I'm probably going to be moving a little bit clunky today because I've got a torn meniscus in my right leg. So I'm recovering from that. Might need to go have surgery, but we'll get into that later. So for squeeze play, a lot of times people are very, very quick with how they crush somebody. And while that might be very good for getting a quick tap, it's going to wear you out pretty fast, and it's also going to mean that the person that you're playing with probably isn't going to be able to tolerate much. So, from a bottoms perspective, one of the things that I have run into is when people start getting sore ribs, and sore ribs is really some minor damage that's happening in the cartilage that holds the ribs together in the body points. Oftentimes, you can get it like right here. I usually get it over here because I've got a pop rib from passing somebody's guard once, where I was trying to leverage their knee out of the way with my rib, and it popped. And so this is where I usually get it. So we want to be very mindful about that pacing. How can we prolong the suffering of the submissive while also, being as cruel as possible? That's one of the things is like if we're always snapping down hard, there's less control there and we can't get that response back from the submissive. So it's really important that when we start to squeeze somebody that we are moving in and out of the squeeze slowly. Now, there's less damage possible from like letting go fast, but if you've ever been in a scorpion crush where somebody's let somebody that off really fast, it is a very shocking thing when your ribs go from becoming this like round shape to oblong suddenly, right? Because we're oblong, right? And it feels like your body is going to explode, and there's probably some risk to that. Not that that's usually where I see the injuries happen. So I'm going to start off by talking about it on a technical level. And so really, like the top leg, the debate between whether or not the top leg is in the front or behind just kind of depends, and you should experiment around with this in case that I'm wrong, and whatnot for you. But what we're looking for when we are trying to squeeze somebody is we're trying to straighten our legs. We try to flex our heels back. If you're getting calf cramping, that usually means that your toes are pointed. So we want to avoid that as much as possible. And then we try to push our heels away, which you can see can close up the space. If the diaphragm is on the upside, right? So I'm facing the head of my submissive. It's kind of more important to try to have this leg in front. That way I can internally rotate into them, right? And we'll have the leverage for that. When it's behind, we just don't have as much strength for that, right? And that's partially because, my bottom leg will end up actually behind my top leg, and so I'm not really going to get that same force here, if that makes any sense. So when I see like porn videos, like whether it's BG East or whatever, a lot of times you'll see that people's knees are bent. When you do that, you take the quads out of the equation. And so when I straighten my legs, you see that space actually closes up. If I am going from a bent, then I have to rely on my adductors, which the adductors are not that small of a muscle, but they do not have the strength because we don't really use them other than for stabilization throughout the day. We don't do like a lot of motions where we're squeezing our legs together or moving laterally. So using the big ass quads to actually get that compression to happen is going to be a lot more powerful than trying to just use your adductors alone. So remember that if your legs are going across, that's going to be less painful than going in with your legs going front to back, like if you were in back mount or you were in the guard, right? Pulling guard. And so the thing about that is, though, again, like I said, we are oblong, so it puts less strain on the ribs to go like this than it does to go like this, right? So pushing in on the sides is going to cause more pain with less kind of breath control and that kind of thing going on. The other thing is, keep in mind that right down here by the floating ribs is your stomach. So if you put a lot of pressure like over here and up, sometimes people can start getting a little bit of a gag reflex or things like that, some heartburn feelings. So we kind of want to avoid that as well. When we place our legs, it's really important to remember that the hips are not compressible. A lot of times, like with back mount or crossbody scissors, what will happen is like people will, straighten their legs down towards the floor and pull the person back. And what you're doing is you're forcing their body onto the uncompressible pelvis, right? And if you're going from the side, if you're on the pelvis, like you're hitting this bone, and you're not going to be able to get the compression. You want it to be a little bit higher. Yes, that puts you in more risk for the stomach, but you're off the pelvis, so you can actually get something out of the squeeze, right? You can go up on the chest. You just have to be a lot more careful. Remember that we are in a lot more risk of breaking things, and also, you're compressing the lungs and the heart, and you're making that harder to work. So you have to be a lot more careful about what you're doing and paying really, really close attention to your partner. When it comes to bear hugs, and I know I did all this in the squeeze technique video, but we'll go ahead and go over this again. Our arms, especially mine, are way smaller than our legs. So unless like somebody is really, really, working on that, they're probably not going to be able to get the same strength. And I would play around with what kind of grips that you use. I generally use a gable grip, but I actually try to come over onto my wrist if I can, if somebody's small enough to me, so that I can get into this position because I have less stable thumbs. And if I actually go with a pure gable grip, those thumbs may be limiting. And this is not the best grip either. So I try to go over, I'll actually try to slide down onto the wrist, and then I will curve up and pull into somebody, and then I'll collapse my body. You don't want to arch your back, that actually is going to be a lot weaker than collapsing into somebody. You can see that actually the foam roll's trying to give on me when I get into there. So if I have my victim down on the ground, again, I can get that exact same grip, put my hips up in the air, and then I drive into them. So I'm using my weight, not just my arm strength to crush them, right? So I'm actually driving this shoulder down into the ground, and I'm actually kind of turning the corner into them. And that's what's going to give you that really, really nice, holy shit compression, right? You could, pike up into it and bring your face down to the ground, or upside ground. That will be a lot tighter. And if you are carrying somebody that's part of your kink, then putting them against the wall. But remember that bear hugs are going to use a lot more energy than a body scissors because we have to be using these much smaller muscles. That being said, if you get into that kind of bear hug position, right, you can actually put on a lot of weight without necessarily, if I'm actually pressing you into the ground, I'm not necessarily using a lot of energy to create that suffering in my partner. Um, I was going to say something really great, but I forgot. Let's go ahead and move on to the body triangle a little bit. Now, again, we've talked about this a fair amount, but what really, like, one of the biggest mistakes that I see is this, where you see that the ankle is right here by the calf, and a lot of times people will point their foot. That's where you're going to get that cramping again. And I'm going to go this side because this is my bad knee. So I want to have this locked foot boot on here, right? And I want to bring my heel in as much as I can to my butt, and then I want to bring my heel to the outside, right? You see what happens here is this space actually closes up when I bring the knee inward and the heel out. But I keep this flexed, right? If you have to, you can, do whatever you can to kind of get this in if you're kind of being forced into this point of position. Even right now, that's kind of causing some cramping for me. So I want to get that as flexed as possible. The cramping will go away, where it's going to be much tighter coming in. And then again, collapsing our body into it. So really what it's going to come down to for a lot of you guys is going to be pacing and your energy expenditure per your opponent's suffering, right? So, if I'm squeezing, like just a straight body scissor or something like that, I'm really, really focused on my breathing. If you're taunting and you're talking and stuff like that, that's great. Go ahead, keep doing it, whatever gets you off. But I'm really thinking of exhaling, just like I'm doing lifting, or if I'm running, I'm really, really thinking about not letting that carbon dioxide build up in my body as I'm leveraging into my opponent. I'm really focused on that. And again, I'm not snapping down. I'm doing kind of a slow thing because I want my partner to kind of adapt to it and be able to suffer for the long run rather than snap all the time. And then you've got that sudden movement that you can't tell, okay, am I starting to strain the ribs, right? Or am I just making the person suffer? So very, very meditative. I'm crushing down on you, so on and so forth. But eventually you're going to fatigue, right? And so if I'm constructing a scene, I'm going to spend some time on body scissors. I'm going to move up to head scissors at some point in time, sometimes if they're into that, or vice versa, depends on what you guys have negotiated. I will move into bear hugs for a little while so that my legs get a little bit of rest, but I'm not giving any rest to my opponent. And that's kind of the key thing here. If I'm like really, really gassed, I'm going to let them go. And I'm going to come up into a knee ride. And remember, when we're doing our knee ride, our weight, this leg can move, right? Because it's light. If this leg is light, that means all my weight is going into my opponent here. So I'm putting my knee down onto my opponent's diaphragm or across their belly or onto their chest or wherever. And I'm just going to hang out here. It's not going to be like, people aren't going to fetishize this the same way as a body scissor, right? They can't worship your leg as much from here. It's just not as sexy. But it keeps them miserable while I'm up here resting. And really, one of the things that I would say is a mistake is trying to do squeeze play where weight is an issue. On a bed, because the bed is going to move out from underneath you and it's going to disperse some of that weight energy, and so not as much of that is going to actually be going into your partner in an obtrusive way. So going onto mats or hard floor is going to be a lot more devastating to your partner than being up on a bed, right? So we're going to go into the next obvious place, which is going to be talking about chokes. One of the things that I think is actually underrated, because in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu specifically, when we do we call it kind of a torture chamber at my school, my former school, but the where you've got the arm and the leg here and the shin is going across the neck, and then it's just kind of this triangle. It's not really effective as a triangle, but the arm is in. The reason why that arm is in partially is so that you can attack it. The other reason why it's in is so that it's harder for you to get out. If it's just your head in a triangle of any kind, or a straight head scissor or whatnot, it's usually not that impossible to get out of. You throw that arm in, now the shoulder's closing off this artery, the leg's cutting off the other artery, and it's really hard for you to get out of there. But if you are not playing with a resisting partner, if you're not in a competition, then it doesn't matter, right? If I'm just trying to control somebody, it's okay to get somebody's head right there. And so one thing that I actually enjoy is when somebody is up on like a couch or something like that, and I'm sitting right here, and you're triangled like this, right? And so the your knee is lined up with their chin, and you've got your hamstring right here, you've got your calf right here, closing off the artery there, and you can actually get dizzy pretty fast. You don't even necessarily have to have this locked on, and you can just pull onto this shin, and we'll actually get somebody to start getting pretty quickly. And then when it comes to like the rear naked choke, right? If you get a bitriangle on or something like that, we'll go ahead and put it on his hip. I don't have hips to work with here, okay? There's no hips on this foam roller. So, I lock somebody up, straight scissor, whatever, and I go for the rear naked choke. Now, the thing that I see a lot of times is people putting the hand on top of the head, and what this does is, when you try to start to squeeze and whatnot, what it does is it pushes their jaw into your arm rather than your bicep and your forearm going back into the arteries, right? So it's better, you'll feel this almost immediately. Like sometimes it's hard to get your arm back here behind, right? So I'm grabbing, my right hand's grabbing my left bicep. I line up my elbow with their sternum and hopefully their chin. And then I bring my arm behind and I'm basically groping my own pec here, right? And I get into this position, and then I think about bringing my elbows together, right? I collapse forward like I'm doing a crunch a little bit, and I squeeze. So what you can see happening here, right, is this space is actually getting smaller. I can chop this down a little bit because I've got all that mobility here, and that closes up the space. And I try to keep my head connected. That's just a good habit if you're doing competition or things like that, so people don't headbutt you back. If you are connected to them, they start to move forward in order to headbutt. My head's connected to their shoulders, so they're not going to create the gap that they need to cause me any damage, right? And I just continue to collapse into them and choke them. So when we are talking about choking people, whether it's going to be in a straight head scissor, which I don't think I really need to cover here. I will actually. Let's go ahead and cover that, and let's do it right now while I'm thinking about it. Is that if we look at the shape of my quad, right? It goes narrow here by the knee. It gets wider, and then it starts getting narrow here again as you get down towards the crotch. So kind of like this space right here, just below the singlet line, is where it's at its widest point before it starts to taper in again. And so if I'm trying to hit the arteries and somebody's facing my junk or they're facing my ass, whatever, I want their neck here at this point where it's getting close to the widest point. That way, if I pull on the head, I'm pulling the arteries, which are on the anterior side of the neck here, right into the muscle there as I'm squeezing, and that's what's going to actually help close that. I don't necessarily want to crush their trachea or anything like that, because it's a bone and cartilageous structure, and I don't want to damage and hurt my opponent or partner. So when we look at chokes, a few things are going to happen. One is that blood pressure in the brain is going to go up because we're diverting blood from the neck up and down, right? And so that extra pressure there is going to increase cranial pressure. The other thing is that we are going to hit the veins in the neck before we hit the arteries, which return blood out of the head. And especially if we're going soft, those veins arteries are going to continue to pump blood into your head while the veins don't let blood back out. And so cranial pressure will increase, and you'll start seeing that petechia, the freckles around the eyes particularly. The face will start to look puffy, and that will maintain after you stop, right, for a little while. And that's where we kind of are putting excess pressure onto the arteries inside the head, the capillaries, and that's what's happening is those are exploding, and that's what's causing that petechia. Meanwhile, a person is not getting as much blood flow to the brain at that point. And if you cut off the blood flow enough, they'll pass out. So, it would be irresponsible for me to not say that when you are choking somebody, different things can happen there. One is that you can trigger cardiac arrest, even if they don't pass out. So, just even holding your breath too long can cause cardiac arrest. I personally love having testicles in spandex used for breath control. That's another one of my kinks. But it comes with risk, right? And that's the main point here. You can have respiratory arrest, you can trigger a stroke, you can create an aneurysm, which is a stretching of the circulatory system, right? In a little bubble that's created, and that becomes particularly weak, that can rupture and go into the brain and all that. So there are some scary shits that can happen when you're doing any of this play, really, because you're doing body scissors. That's increasing your blood pressure. That's putting extra strain on your circulatory system, and so I don't ever want to give you the impression that what we are doing is perfectly reasonably safe. I want you to go into this with an informed opinion, and I don't think that people should be doing, this type of play without at least CPR first aid knowledge and a commitment that, you're choking somebody, they die, you can go to jail. That is the risk for the top, and you have to be willing to accept that risk if you're going to be playing like this. So we've talked about, pacing for the squeezing. We've talked about, not clamping down super hard all the time. You're not wrestling in the Pan Ams. You're not trying to get a submission here. You're here to torture. And for torture, you want to play the long game. So again, it's about rationing your energy, right? Making sure that the sub is staying tormented the whole time while you're not expending all your energy. That way you can play for an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours at a time without wearing yourself out. And we've talked about safety. We've talked about technique to a fair amount. The negotiation obviously is very important. Oh, I was going to talk about taunting. And this is going to be a really, really personal thing for different people. And like I said, the video I was just watching on Watchfighters, and I forgot who did it. It was the Australian guy with the really big beard, and I forget his name right now. And he's, there can be banter there, but be careful with banter, especially if you are talking to somebody that you're proposing to meet with. It's better for you to develop the rapport first and find out if they're okay with the banter, because some people are not going to be. But, I do think that when somebody's suffering, they can't get out, taunting them can be a very fun thing, and it's really personal as far as whatever you're bringing into it, as far as your personality goes. So I don't know that I actually have as much to say on that, and I'm sorry for wasting your time on that. Hit me with any questions you guys have. Hopefully this has been helpful for you, and have fun squeezing. See you guys later.